Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi, I'm Oliver.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Welcome to Science in Easy English.
Are we losing the war against bacteria?
So to really start off our deep dive today, we are embarking on just a massive mission.
We really are. We have a towering stack of research in front of us for this one.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about pulling data from the World Health Organization, the CDC, and then on top of that, some incredibly cutting-edge AI research out of MIT, plus a few global market reports.
It is a lot to get through.
It is. But the goal here is to figure out exactly how bacteria are currently outsmarting our absolute best medicines. And then we're going to explore the radical, completely sci-fi level technologies we are developing to basically fight back.
It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's a vital one. Because whether you realize it or not, you are directly connected to this issue.
Right.
I mean, you've probably taken an antibiotic recently, or for
Yeah.
a common infection, maybe the sinus thing or strep throat.
Yeah, we just pop a pill and we expect to feel better.
Exactly.
Mm.
We take that modern medical miracle completely for granted. But what is happening invisibly right inside your body is nothing short of a high-stakes evolutionary arms race.
An arms race. I like that. Let's unpack the realities of that because digging into the data, specifically some recent insights from AARP and Pfizer, there is a massive misconception that we really need to clear up right at the top.
Oh, the resistance myth.
Yeah,
Yes.
the big myth is that people become resistant to antibiotics. It is so common to hear someone say, oh, I've taken too many antibiotics in my life, so my body is immune to them now.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And it is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the biology. The human body does not develop resistance to the medication. The bacteria mutate to survive the drugs.
So it's the bug, not the person.
Right. It is the microscopic pathogen that is adapting and evolving, not you. Think about it this way. When you take an antibiotic, you are essentially introducing a highly lethal threat to a bacterial population inside your system. The vast majority of them die.
Which is what we want.
Exactly. But the bacteria that happen to have a random genetic mutation that allows them to survive that threat, they live on, they multiply, and then they spread.
And the scale of this problem, I mean, reading through the statistics in these reports, it becomes clear very quickly that this isn't just a minor medical inconvenience. It's a global crisis hiding in plain sight.
To put some grim numbers to that, right now, antibiotic-resistant infections kill over 1.2 million people a year globally.
Wow.
And in the United States alone, that number is 35,000 deaths annually. That is tens of thousands of people going to the hospital with an infection that, maybe 20 years ago would have been easily cured. But today, nothing works.
That is terrifying.
It is.
And the trajectory is what has the medical community so deeply alarmed. Because according to a 2024 WHO report, 1 in 6 common bacterial infections in the year 2023 were drug-resistant.
Pause on that for a second. 1 in 6. That means for every 6 people who get a run-of-the-mill bacterial infection, one of them might be facing a bug that our standard go-to drugs simply cannot kill. The safety net we have relied on for nearly a century is fraying.
Fraying fast. And the forecasts are incredibly sobering. By the year 2050, deaths from these resistant infections could surge to between 8.22 million and 10 million a year.
Which is just apparent.
That means antimicrobial resistance could potentially surpass cancer in terms of global mortality.
Surpassing cancer. When you frame it like that, the true weight of the situation becomes unavoidable. And it's not just the human cost, as devastating as that is. There's a massive economic cost of inaction here, too.
Market reports touched on that, right?
Yeah. The estimates suggest that if we fail to get this under control, we're looking at a $1.7 trillion annual reduction in global economic output.
Trillion with a T.
Trillion. We're talking about longer hospital stays, lost productivity, and the collapse of entire medical procedures. Because without working antibiotics, routine surgeries, organ transplants, and even chemotherapy become incredibly dangerous.
Because your immune system is compromised during those procedures.
Exactly. So if you get an infection and the drugs don't work, a routine surgery becomes fatal.
So how are these microscopic organisms actually pulling this off? I mean, how are they beating drugs that were specifically designed by brilliant scientists to destroy them?
That's the billion-dollar question.
There is a brilliant analogy in the core source research that breaks down the biology perfectly for those of us who aren't microbiologists. It's called antibiotics and robbers.
I love this analogy.
Right. Imagine your human body is a bank. Inside this bank are valuables, resources, nutrients, everything a living cell needs. The bacteria are the robbers trying to break in and steal those valuables, and the antibiotics are the security guards or the cops trying to stop them.
It is a remarkably effective way to visualize what happens at the cellular level. So let's use that bank analogy to break down the actual mechanisms of resistance.
Let's do it.
The first tactic is what biologists call target alteration, or, in our analogy, altering the locks. Antibiotics often work like a very specific key fitting into a highly specific lock on the surface of the bacteria.
And once the key turns, it destroys the cell.
Exactly. But over time, the bacteria simply mutate and change their protein structures. They literally change the shape of the lock. The antibiotic key no longer fits, and the drug just bounces off, completely useless.
So it's like the cops show up with the master key to the vault, and the robbers have already rekeyed the entire building while you're inside.
Spot on. That alone is frustrating. But then you have what I think is one of the most aggressive, almost the physical tactics, the bouncers.
The bouncers.
The scientific term for those bouncers is efflux pumps. Some bacteria develop the ability to actively grab the antibiotic molecules and pump them right back out of the cell before the drug has a chance to do any damage.
Just throwing them right back out.
Exactly. And the data notes that gram-negative bacteria are particularly notorious for this. We were talking about bugs like E. coli, Klebsiella, and Pseudomonas.
And gram-negative bacteria are already so tough to kill because they have a double membrane, right? It's like they're wearing a double layer of body armor.
They have incredibly complex cell envelopes.
Mm.
So not only is it hard for the antibiotic to get inside in the first place, but if it does manage to slip past that armor, these highly efficient efflux pumps just grab the drug and toss it out onto the street like an unwanted guest at a nightclub.
That is wild. And then there's the sharing mechanism, which frankly feels like a horror movie. Biologists call it horizontal gene transfer, but in our analogy, it's sharing lockpicks.
This is arguably the most terrifying part of the arms race, because it answers the question of how resistance spreads so unbelievably fast.
Right, because they don't reproduce like us.
Exactly. Bacteria don't just pass genetic traits down to their offspring the way humans do. They can share resistance genes laterally with their neighbors via small circular pieces of DNA called plasmids.
So to put that in perspective for you listening, a completely harmless bacterium sitting normally in your gut can suddenly learn how to fight off advanced drugs just by physically bumping into a resistant bacterium.
Yes, it is the microscopic equivalent of Bluetooth file sharing.
Bluetooth file sharing. That's perfect. The robbers are just standing outside the bank, passing out blueprints, lockpicks, and body armor to anyone walking by.
It is a massive evolutionary advantage. And if sharing lockpicks wasn't enough, some bacteria have learned how to literally chew up the security guards.
Right. Enzymatic inactivation.
Bacteria can produce specific enzymes, the most famous being beta-lactamases. These enzymes actively seek out and physically break down the molecular structure of drugs, like penicillin.
So they don't just hide from the drug or pump it out?
No, they go on the offensive. They dismantle the antibiotic on contact, rendering it completely harmless.
And finally, when all else fails, they build fortresses, biofilms.
Biofilms are so stubborn.
Yeah, I was reading about how bacteria can secrete this sticky protective matrix that surrounds their entire colony. This biofilm acts as an impenetrable shield that traps antibiotics on the outside. It completely protects the bacteria inside from harm.
So when you combine all these tactics-altering locks, throwing drugs out with bouncers, sharing lockpicks via Bluetooth, chewing up the drugs, and building sticky fortresses, you start to see why these pathogens are so incredibly difficult to defeat.
Which leads to a very logical question that you are probably wondering right now. We've actually known about antibiotic resistance since 1941. We found resistant bacteria shortly after the very first antibiotic, penicillin, was introduced.
That's right.
So if we know how they do it, and we've known for decades, why not just invent new drugs? Why are we running out of ammo?
That is the ultimate innovation paradox. And the answer has almost nothing to do with science. It lies in broken economics.
Broken economics.
Developing a new pharmaceutical drug is staggeringly expensive. It costs over $1.5 billion to bring a new drug from discovery through all the clinical trials and finally to the market. But the business model for antibiotics is fundamentally flawed compared to literally any other medication.
Let's contrast it then. If a pharmaceutical company invents a new blood pressure medication or a daily cholesterol pill or a cancer drug, a patient might take that pill every single day for years or even decades.
Exactly. That generates a massive, reliable stream of revenue to cover those $1.5 billion in research costs. But an antibiotic, you take it for 5 to 10 days, your infection clears up, and you stop taking it. The volume of sales is incredibly low.
And it gets even worse for the drug companies. Say a company actually does manage to invent a brilliant, highly effective new antibiotic that can crush these resistant superbugs. The medical community will purposely shelve it.
They have to.
Right. Doctors and hospitals will hold it in reserve, locking it in a literal vault, using it only for absolute last resort emergencies. And they do that specifically to prevent bacteria from developing resistance to it.
It is the right move medically, but financially, it's a disaster. The company spends $1.5 billion to make a life-saving drug that doctors actively avoid prescribing unless a patient is on death's door. The result,
Pharmaceutical company goes bankrupt.
the pharmaceutical company comes bankrupt, which is exactly why the pipeline of new drugs is so dry. The WHO report highlights this beautifully. They noted that there are currently only 15 innovative antibacterials in the entire clinical pipeline globally.
15.
15. For a threat that might kill 10 million people a year by 2050, that is an incredibly low number.
Fortunately, there is a shift happening in how we fund this. New financial models are being tested to fix this broken market. Countries like the United Kingdom and Sweden are trying out subscription-style models to incentivize research and development.
I love this concept. It treats antibiotics like a Netflix subscription, or maybe more accurately, like a fire extinguisher.
A fire extinguisher. That's a great way to think about it.
Instead of paying per pill, the government essentially pays a pharmaceutical company a flat annual subscription fee for access to the antibiotic, regardless of how much of it is actually used.
Which guarantees a return on investment for the drug maker.
Yes. It allows them to keep the lights on and encourages them to keep innovating while allowing doctors to safely hold the drug in reserve without bankrupting the creator.
But even if we fix the funding, we still have a massive data problem. Fixing the economics doesn't help us if we don't know where the bacteria are mutating. The London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine outlines what they call the global blank map.
The surveillance blind spot. The data clearly shows that the highest burdens of antimicrobial resistance are concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia.
But those are precisely the regions where data is critically lacking.
Yes, because of severe infrastructure gaps. We are trying to fight a global, highly coordinated war without a map of where the enemy is concentrated. Traditional genomic sequencing requires massive, centralized laboratories.
Right. Historically, you had to take a sample from a patient, put it on ice, ship it off to a capital city or even another country, and wait weeks for the results to come back. By the time you know what antibiotic to use, the patient might have already passed away.
It's just too slow.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, a bit hopeful. We have portable tech stepping in to fill that gap. The details in the deep dive sources on the Oxford nanopore sequencers are incredible.
The implications of those devices are truly transformative. We are moving away from massive million-dollar lab setups.
These Oxford nanopore sequencers literally fit inside a backpack. They are about the size of a large USB drive. You can take them directly into the field, plug them into a standard laptop, and do real-time genomic sequencing.
It's amazing.
The reports detailed researchers taking these devices into rural areas to test slaughterhouse runoff in the Gambia. They're walking into a field, taking a water sample, and within hours, knowing exactly what resistant genes are floating in that water, or deploying them during cholera outbreaks,
You don't have to wait weeks for a lab. You can identify the exact genetic resistance of the bacteria right there on the ground, in real time.
which gives doctors the map they need.
But spotting the enemy is only half the battle.
Hmm.
We still need the weapons to fight them, which is where artificial intelligence is completely changing the landscape. The AI discovery research coming out of MIT, led by biomedical engineer Jim Collins, is genuinely mind-blowing.
What his team is doing feels like magic, but it's just incredible computing power.
They used a deep learning neural net, a highly advanced form of AI, to screen thousands upon thousands of molecular structures. The AI wasn't just looking at existing drugs. It was learning what specific structural features make a molecule lethal to bacteria.
And it discovered a compound they named halicin.
Halicin. Yes.
And to be clear, halicin isn't just an upgrade to an old drug. It represents an entirely new class of antibiotic. And what makes it so special is how it kills the bacteria.
Right, because it doesn't target proteins.
Exactly. Instead of targeting a specific protein, which, as we discussed, bacteria easily mutate and change the locks on it, halicin kills bacteria by disrupting their electrochemical gradient.
To put that simply, it destroys the bacteria's ability to generate energy across its cell membrane.
Think of it like unplugging the bacteria's battery. You can change the locks on the doors all you want, but if someone unplugs the power to the entire building, the systems fail and the cell dies. The AI found a completely new way to attack, and it didn't stop there. It also found another compound called abacin.
Abelson is incredibly targeted. It specifically goes after Acinetobacter baumannii, which is a deadly, notoriously resistant pathogen that frequently plagues hospitals.
Acinetobacter baumannii, got it.
And the mechanism of action the AI found for abacin is entirely unique. It kills the pathogen by messing with its lipoprotein trafficking.
I loved how this was explained in the sources. Think of lipoprotein trafficking like the bacteria's internal Amazon delivery network. The cell needs building blocks constantly moving around inside it to survive.
And abelson basically hacks their internal GPS. All the essential building blocks get delivered to the wrong address, the logistics collapse, and the bacteria simply falls apart.
The power of using AI here is speed and scale. It can digitally model and test chemical interactions in a matter of hours that would take human researchers decades or even centuries to test in a physical lab.
And perhaps the most astonishing thing this AI did was look backward in time.
This was a massive aha moment for me. They went full Jurassic Park.
They really did. The researchers used the AI to scan extinct genomes. They literally fed the AI the DNA of our extinct human relatives, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans.
That is just...
I know. The AI was searching for ancient peptides, which are small proteins that might have had antimicrobial properties hundreds of thousands of years ago, long before modern medicine existed.
And they actually found one. They identified an ancient peptide hidden in that extinct DNA, and they named it Neanderthalin 1. When the scientists synthesized it in the modern world and tested it, it successfully treated bacterial infections in mice.
We are using supercomputers to reach hundreds of thousands of years back in time to borrow immune system weapons from Neanderthals. If that isn't sci-fi, I don't know what is.
It is incredible. But speaking of reaching back in time, we're also reviving technology from the 1920s. We are talking about phage therapy.
Bacteriophages are naturally occurring viruses that exclusively hunt and kill bacteria. They look like tiny alien lunar landers under a microscope, and they were actually first used therapeutically all the way back in 1921.
But they were largely abandoned in Western medicine, right?
Yes. When broad-spectrum antibiotics like penicillin were discovered, phages were pushed aside. Penicillin was easier to mass-produce, easier to store, and it killed a wide variety of bacteria at once. Phages, on the other hand, are highly specific. One type of phage might only hunt one specific strain of bacteria.
But now that those broad-spectrum antibiotics are failing us, these bacteria-hunting viruses are making a huge comeback. There was a pivotal 2062 FDA compassionate use case that really brought this into the spotlight.
A patient was dying of a severe multi-drug resistant infection. They were out of time, traditional antibiotics had completely failed, and the doctors were out of options.
So as a last resort, the FDA granted emergency permission to use phage therapy. They found the specific viruses that hunted this exact bacteria, pumped them into the patient, and the phages hunted down the infection and saved their life.
It proved that the concept still works. But modern science isn't just relying on wild phages anymore. We are upgrading them. Scientists are now genetically engineering these viruses to carry CRISPR-Cas systems.
CRISPR is the gene editing tool that is revolutionizing everything right now.
Exactly. So the virus acts as a targeted delivery vehicle. It lands on the bacteria, but instead of just reproducing, it injects the bacteria with a CRISPR tool that actively targets and shreds the bacteria's resistance genes from the inside out. We are turning viruses into microscopic genetic surgeons.
And CRISPR isn't just for treatment, it's revolutionizing diagnostics too. The research detailed CRISPR diagnostic tools with incredibly cool names like Sherlock and Detector.
The diagnostic application is arguably just as crucial as the treatments. Currently, if a patient comes into the hospital with a severe blood infection, traditional tests to figure out exactly what bacterial strain is infecting them and what drugs it might be resistant to can take 48 to 72 hours.
And in a severe infection like sepsis, a patient might not have 72 hours. Waiting 3 days for a lab result is a death sentence.
Precisely. These CRISPR-based diagnostic tools change that entirely. They can identify the genetic signature of a specific infection almost instantly, allowing doctors to deploy the exact right drug on day one.
We are really throwing the absolute limits of human computational power at this crisis. You see it with the grand challenges launched by GSK and the Fleming Initiative.
That is a perfect example of massive resources being mobilized. They are using supercomputers to digitally model the complex human immune response to MRSA, a very dangerous, highly resistant staph infection.
By simulating how the bacteria behaves and how our immune system reacts on a molecular level, they are trying to pave the way for a viable vaccine.
And they are expanding this computational power to target deadly fungal infections too, like Aspergillus, which is becoming increasingly resistant to our very limited supply of antifungal drugs.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've talked about deep learning AI, backpack DNA sequencers, reviving Neanderthal peptides, and genetically engineered CRISPR viruses. But sitting at home or driving in the car listening to this, what is your role in this massive evolutionary war? Do individual choices actually matter?
Your individual actions matter immensely. They are the critical frontline defense in slowing down this crisis while the scientists develop these futuristic new tools. First and foremost, only take antibiotics when they are absolutely medically necessary.
Right. Never pressure your doctor for an antibiotic if you have a viral infection like a common cold, a sore throat, or the flu.
Antibiotics do absolutely nothing to viruses. You are just exposing your body's good bacteria to a threat and encouraging resistance for no reason.
And second, if you are prescribed antibiotics for a bacterial infection, finish the entire prescription exactly as directed. Don't stop taking them on day 3 just because you feel better.
If you stop early, you kill off the weak bacteria, but leave behind the strongest, most resilient ones to mutate and multiply.
And finally, stay up to date on your vaccines. It sounds simple, but preventing infections in the first place drastically reduces the overall disease burden and the global need for antibiotics. It buys the researchers time.
It really is a team effort.
Mm-hmm.
You hold the line with good habits while the researchers build the next generation of defenses.
It is wild to think that we are currently fighting our most futuristic medical war by using AI to dig up the extinct DNA of Neanderthals and reviving 100-year-old viral therapies. It makes you wonder what other forgotten biological secrets are hidden away inside our own evolutionary past, just waiting to be unlocked as the ultimate cure.